To lead us through our next segment on sustainable energy and human creativity, we are very pleased to welcome back to Earth Optimism MSNBC anchor Ali Velshi.
Hi, everybody. Ali Velshi coming to you from New York City. I was hoping we would all be together for the celebration of Earth Optimism 2020, but obviously we're not. But we're getting together in a different way that I suspect for many of you, like me, is becoming a little bit more commonplace. The idea that we're meeting in these unusual ways. For the next hour, we're going to have some great conversations about people who are not just optimistic about the Earth on the anniversary of Earth Day, but in fact who have been doing things specifically to give us all cause to be more optimistic. And by the way, everything here is virtual. This background behind me is virtual background too. So if you see any weird stuff going on, that's because it's virtual. Anyway, so I want to talk to a few people over the course of the next hour about why they're optimistic, things we can do optimistic about the Earth in the next year, and lessons we can learn from the situation that we're in right now. There are probably positives and negatives for the Earth situation we're in right now with COVID-19 and coronavirus, but my guests have something to say about that as well. I want to start by bringing Charlotte McCurdy in. I think she's connected to us. Charlotte, there you are. Hi, Charlotte. Good to see you. Charlotte is a designer. I don't know if that's a virtual background or that's really you. That's fantastic. You look like you're out in the woods. Charlotte had a project called After Ancient Sunlight, and she fashioned a raincoat, water-resistant item of clothing that not only is made from algae, but actually absorbs carbon from the air. Now, can you imagine if all of us were carbon sinks, right? If we were all going around life possibly having a negative carbon footprint, because not only the things we're doing and the way we're heating our homes and the way we're moving our vehicles, but the stuff we're actually wearing is attracting carbon. Talk to me about this, Charlotte. Tell me what it is you invented, how you came about it, and how it works.
Thank you so much, Ali. It's great to be here. I think you've hit on the key point of it, the question of what it would feel like to be part of the solution. That's the feeling I'm trying to convey and share and make tangible. So it's a raincoat. It's made out of a plastic I developed that's made entirely out of marine macroalgae. And by having all of the process around it be carbon neutral, you can have the sequestered carbon of the natural algae growth, the carbon that makes up those polymer bonds, represent sequestered carbon for the duration of the life of that jacket. We'll be able to see some visual of that jacket now. And what I want to do with this project is to highlight, how much of our material culture is part of climate change. Every fossil carbon-based material we rely on, like our plastics, like our textiles, 60% of textiles are made of fossil fuels right now. And then also to highlight the inverse of that, which is that with the emerging technology and the emerging mastery we have of biotechnology and chemistry, we're able to not only cut off our dependence on those ancient hydrocarbons, but we can start to make useful molecules that are important for daily life, important for keeping people safe, and have them be not only less bad in terms of carbon emissions, but actually be carbon negative for the duration of their life. And at the end of life, if it becomes fertilizer, then that can remain sequestered carbon into the biosphere, which is where we needed to get it. We need to get it out of the air, as we discussed in an earlier section.
And Charlotte, the commonality with all of you who I'm speaking to this hour is that you're not actually about doing things that are less bad. We're actually trying to be positively impactful on the Earth. Talk to me about the technology and the scalability of this sort of thing. What brought you to it? What's your background that allowed you to do that? And how scalable is it? I do know that you've had design awards from it, and you've got partnerships with clothing designers. So it seems that there's a real future for what you're doing. Is it something we could all get used to, that I can open up my closet and I'll I'll have carbon neutral or carbon negative clothing?
Absolutely. Part of what I hope that I can do is raise awareness of the potential of this kind of technology, so that there are companies out there currently sitting on technology that can do just this. And if they can see that there's latent demand for those kinds of materials, if they can show up and offer that to their consumer base who's so hungry to do good on climate, That's why I'm trying to be as open, as transparent about this process as possible. My particular plastic, the important piece that still needs to be figured out is how to increase the supply chain of those marine macroalgae in a way that is potentially beneficial to the ecosystems, marine ecosystems that are currently so strapped for refuges. So I'm not currently trying to scale my plastic. It's definitely more of a proof of concept and a vision of a decarbonized future. But I'm always interested in partnerships and conversations about how that material might get to scale. But I think more importantly, how other materials that are already much farther along in the R&D curve could center carbon and center carbon emissions in the way they're framing the story of how this material could be more ecologically beneficial. If they can really bring that to the center, I think that would be success for me.
Charlotte, part of it is a psychological shift in mind, right? On one hand, we want people to do the right things in every part of their life, including what they're wearing and how we're consuming on a larger scale. How does this sort of contribute to your idea as somebody who is doing more good? How do we? What's the mind shift required in that over time? Because we're going to have to shift people's mind on everything, including the way we consume fossil fuels and the way we travel. But this is sort of a step in that direction.
I think you're right to highlight the question of transformation. And to me, the most deep and consistent way to transform behavior is by changing the fundamental technology that we live our life by. And so we're at a point where solar and wind are the cost competitive form of energy generation for 2/3 of the human population. And that happened because of decades of research and development. The problem we have next that I see over that horizon is the emissions that are intrinsic to the skyline, the cement, the steel, the materials of our life. We don't have a plan for that yet. And we can offer that mental shift by just changing the fundamental calculus of people as they're making decisions. If these new materials aren't just more expensive virtue signaling pieces, but actually become cost competitive because they can scale appropriately, like that's sort of how I hope to make the mental shift, not by asking people to do the right thing and spend more money, but actually to make the right thing more accessible, more affordable, to make it easy to do good.
Charlotte, that is perfect, because you've set me up for Bill McDonough, who shares your view on that the virtue signaling is interesting, certainly not bad. It's not worse than the opposite. But in fact, this needs to be competitive. This needs to be scalable, and needs to be the kind of thing that we think about on every level of what we do. So, Charlotte, thank you for what you have done, and thank you for giving us a new way of thinking about how we can develop clothing, how we can think about it. Charlotte McCurdy, thanks, and we look forward to seeing your collaborations and a lot more of your work out there. Charlotte basically set up Bill McDonough for us. Bill is a partner at William McDonough and Partners. He's a pioneer, a leader in design, in architecture, and he really has been in that area the father, if you will, of a way of thinking about not cradle to grave, but cradle to cradle. And just to pick up, Bill, because you and I talk enough that we can just pick up a conversation in the middle somewhere with where Charlotte was, where she talks about the stuff around us that you can't virtue signal your way out of. You can't wear the building you work in. You can't decide how energy efficient that building is. But you have married those two worlds, right? You've married a world in which you can give me all the things that a building or an apartment or a house can give me, and we can do right by the environment, and we can power it and heat it and cool it in ways that are much more forcible than we're using right now.
Yeah, that's right, Ali. And I think the key to it is that we learn from nature and we respect it and we're inspired by it and we conform with it. Because nature has laws. And as an architect, obviously, I have to follow the law of gravity. It's not just a good idea, it's a law. Well, if we look at carbon balances, nature knows how to balance its carbon. And this is something that we can do. And so I remember in 1969, when I was at college and I decided I might want to be an architect, I decided I wanted to design buildings like trees. Because you think what a tree can do, it's funny. There was a car company had a picture of a tree and it said our aim, zero emissions. But when you think about it, trees emit oxygen. So we're not actually interested in zero emissions. We're interested in positive emissions. So this idea that things can combine themselves and be part of the natural world and be positive is fundamental to our very existence. So it's fun to see all these products at every scale being able to do things this way.
Is important because we want to be able to do the right thing. You share Charlotte's view, right? That life when it comes to the earth and the climate is not about being less bad. In 2020, it can really be about being positively good. In your world, you work for corporations, you work for companies that want to build things to scale. They certainly want to be on the right side of history, but they need everything to work. And you're able to make the things that work in our old-fashioned buildings work in a way that's more in symmetry with the earth. Can you tell us a little about that for anybody who's joining us who doesn't know about some of the work you've done?
Well, I started by building a solar house experiment while I was at Yale in Ireland. And, I went back to my ancestors, who should be the Irish, and said, how do I build a solar house in Ireland, a country famous for not having lots of sun? So, and I learned how to build. And then I came to New York and I did my apprenticeship. And then I'd say the two fundamental moments, three. One was designing the Environmental Defense Fund in 1984 in New York City, where we looked at all the materials and the chemistries and the light quality, and then moved to, in 89, I did a daycare center for Frankfurt, where we said, what if a building could be operated by children and they could tune it to the sun and grow food on the roof and provide hot water for their parents to do laundry while they're waiting for the children in the daycare center? What fun would that be? And at the same time, did a building for Warsaw, Poland, for a competition, which we won. And I said, well, you can have the building design, but you have to plant 10 square miles of trees to go with it, because we've calculated the amount of carbon that would go to the atmosphere from Polish power plants, coal, and for operating it. And it's 10 square miles it needs to offset the building. That's 30 years ago, Ollie. That's 3 years before the Earth Summit. So these issues for us have been fundamental from day one, because we're trying to design buildings like trees. And so carbon really matters. And so as time went on, when Bill Ford asked me to do the River Rouge, all the people at Ford said, really, what are you going to do? And I said, I'd like to do the world's largest green roof. And they said, that's impossible. We've talked to the roofing companies. You can't do that. And we're on a schedule and on a budget. So we stuck to the same schedule and budget, but we asked the question of botanists instead of people who make tar and thermoplastic polyolefin, and said, is there a way to do a roof that could be green, this big, 10.5 acres? And we found it in East Germany. It had been developed as camouflage for MiG fighter jets during the Cold War. And so we brought that technology to the States. It's now the largest green roof company in the world. But we did it at the Ford plant on time and on budget. But the powerful thing for the business is that it saved Ford $35 million in CapEx for the factory, instead of 3 chemical treatment plants and miles of pipes to use that for water purification. And so saving $35 million for a company in the board level is like walking in and saying, with the Ford Taurus at a 4% margin, I'm not giving you an order for $900 million worth of cars. Those are equal financial propositions. Green roof, an order for $900 million worth of cars. So is it a good idea? Do it. That's how we have to do this, is wage peace through commerce by design.
So when you and I met several years ago, I mean, one of the things that's about climate and about the earth and about the circular movement that you are a very key part of is that it's exponential in its growth. 10 years ago, you needed to convince people that it was viable. Now you are in the business of explaining to people how it's better than not doing the opposite, because you don't have to do X. You save this much money in capital expenditure and operating expenditure. You can sell fewer products and make the same money. how exponential has the adoption of being good to the earth through architecture and building been?
Building has been actually quite impressive because it's surprising that it's that sector, construction and building design, that has been so vigorous. You see green building councils around the world. What I've been surprised by and not excited by per se, is that we don't have green industrial design councils. It's slow. The product side has been very slow. And so we see a lot of issues of plastics in the world. I'm very involved in that now. We're designing new plastics. We're looking at all the recovery systems in oceans and in land. And these things are really critical to us now. And we've been way too slow to realize this is coming and really needs to be addressed. So one of the things there, I think we need new language. That's why when I first said being less bad is not being good, I really am looking at, yes, be less bad, but it's inadequate. We have to also be more good. So be both. And as far as the business of this goes, Peter Drucker, the famous business advisor, executive advisor, said in his book, Effective Executive, it's the manager's job to do something the right way, but the executive's job to do the right thing, and then give it to the managers to do it the right way. Because if you're doing it the right way, but you're doing the wrong thing, and you're using Six Sigma perfection, then you become perfectly wrong. So we have so many businesses right now that are not based in anything that's coherent in nature and with health, that they're doing the wrong things perfectly. And so it's time for the executives to step up and say, let's do the right things.
And Bill, there's a great article that the people watching us should look up. You introduced this new language of carbon in 2017 in an article called "Carbon is Not the Enemy," which was published in the journal Nature. So I think that is something that we should all become familiar with, the new language. Bill, as always, it is always a remarkable pleasure to see you. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for your commitment to the planet and to making us speak differently about it, think differently about it, work differently in it, and live differently in it. Bill McDonough is a good friend of mine, and I'd be glad to celebrate Earth Day with you again. Bill McDonough. I want to bring in a panel to talk some more about this. Paul Bunje, Fred Krupp, and Camron Gorguinpour. Let me just tell you a little bit about these guys. Paul and I know each other from a long time ago. He and I were both involved in the X Prize, and he's the co-founder of Conservation X Labs. Fred, you just heard Bill McDonough talking about, is the president of the Environmental Defense Fund, and Camron he is actually currently the director of mobility solutions at NG Impact. He's an electric mobility expert, so he knows a lot about these things. These three folks, and I see a blank screen where Fred is. I don't know whether he's become virtual or not. Oh, there he is. There's Fred. All right, good to see you all. Thank you, guys. Paul, let me start with you, because one of the things the weird thing about what we're doing right now is that we're all doing this virtually. Last time we marked Earth Day with Smithsonian Earth Optimism, we were together in Washington, D.C., and we were planning to be together again this year, and we are virtually. But talk to me about the way in which this thing that we're going through now with coronavirus has an impact on climate, because a lot of the people I've spoken to have been frustrated by the fact that, once again, there's something out there that is sucking 80 or 90% of the oxygen, no pun intended, out of the cycle. And just when it felt like climate was getting a foothold in larger discussions, poof, now we're all talking about something else.
The exponential growth in some of these technologies. And I feel like at minimum, COVID-19 and this pandemic has given the entire world a rapid education in what exponentials are, because that's exactly how viruses grow. But it can both be bad, carbon dioxide emissions, and good, things like solar and wind technology, which, as Bill was just saying, have been phenomenal. Even the expert predictions of how that would grow have been consistently wrong for the last 2 decades, simply because the price for a kilowatt of electricity from solar has been this incredibly fast exponential growth curve. So there are positive exponentials. We can actually capitalize on this. The other thing we can do, I'm sitting in my yard in Los Angeles where it's actually quite hot today, so I'm glad we're talking about climate change, and also reflecting on the fact that everyone's pointing out just how beautiful the skies are now that we're not driving and out. And you even hear some discussion from people about whether this is an indication that we really shouldn't be doing all of these things. Well, of course, this isn't a solution to climate change. A pandemic is an atrocious event that does nothing to change the long-term trajectory. But I think it gives us all some insight into where we could go if we as a society want to do so. And I often think that we're living in perhaps the most interesting era in all of history, because not only are we so aware of the threats, our science and knowledge is unparalleled, we also have an unparalleled ability to capitalize on technology and on the genius of billions of humans around the world that can connect virtually through things like we're doing today and be part of the solution. And that means we have an opportunity as society, as communities, to choose what we want coming out of this pandemic. Do we want our skies continuously clean? Because we have the technology today through energy generation, demand like electric vehicles. We have the technology today to make that a reality if we choose to do so. And speaking of optimism, the reason I'm so optimistic we can is because you saw how quickly societies around the world have made the very difficult choice to close our economies in order to save lives. Even in places where politicians don't want to do that, people are staying home because they know it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
We can do that in the long term on climate change. We can capitalize on this opportunity that shows us people really do want to do the right thing. And I think we've got an opportunity coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic to address climate change head on in a way that's never happened before.
Brad, this is an interesting point that Paul makes, because when it comes to the biggest things we have to do in society, our socioeconomic ills or climate, everybody sort of feels like they're on the right side of it, but they tell you that it's too hard to do, and boy, it's going to cost a lot of money. Now, we've had two guests already on who have said the cost a lot of money thing doesn't have to be the case, but the bottom line is because of coronavirus, we're in the midst of something that is really hard to deal with, that is costing us a lot of money. They're putting more money around the world. Governments are putting more money into rebuilding the house than we ever have before. So why not build it the right way? And I ask you this, Paul, I ask you this, Fred, because I'm a business journalist. I cover companies. I'm a capitalist. I like companies. I interview CEOs. But we need business to take a more leading role in this.
There's no question about that, Ali. The businesses are the source of a lot of the problems, and they're also the source of the solutions. So working with business, which is what EDF does a lot of, is absolutely key. And as we use so much money to recover from coronavirus, it just makes sense to build back better, for communities to be built back in ways that are resilient, for energy systems to be built in ways that are clean. To me, Ali, there's three main things. One, it makes sense to build back cleaner because air pollution is killing anywhere between 4 and 7 million people annually around the globe. Two, we have to be more respectful of the science and listen to the scientists when they tell us to take early preventative action, as they did on COVID-19, as they have been for years on climate change. And third, we're all in the same boat. As we're learning on COVID-19, everybody's got a social distance in order to get through this. Same on climate change, we all have to do our part. Air pollution also tragically has made those who live in communities that have been disproportionately affected, poor people who live near ports, live near roads, their lungs are damaged, and the early work from Harvard tells us that this is increasing their death rate along with other factors. So air pollution is really important even before COVID to clean up. Science, the parallels are clear. We didn't act soon enough in this world, certainly not in this country, to begin testing, to take this thing seriously. And it's going to cost us dearly for those delays. Same thing with climate change. We have to get on it, now. And certainly as stimulus monies are used to recover economically, it makes sense to, build back cleaner. And then finally, we're all in this together, and the point speaks for itself.
Camron, let me ask you about this, because this week with the weird thing that happened with the price of oil, where on Monday, people who were going to have oil were paying other people to take the oil from them rather than buying it. The world, America uses, it's 5% of the world's population. It uses a quarter of the world's oil, somewhere between 20 and 25% of the world's oil, largely because we drive as much as we do and move stuff across the country. Let's talk about transportation. That's both the low-hanging fruit and the hardest thing to do if we're talking about getting off of fossil fuels. It's a low-hanging fruit because automobile emissions, bringing them down, is something car companies will participate in and people are in favor of. On the other hand, boy, do we drive a lot.
Well, yeah, sure we do. Although, if there's one good thing that's come of this current crisis, it's that we've really seen how people will change their travel habits. And in the United States, I was looking at a county by county map, and even places where there were no government mandates or requirements to stop driving, people were stopping driving. You're seeing 30, 40, 50% reduction in vehicle miles traveled, which is incredible and a testament to people's willingness to not just help themselves, but to help others. So I definitely think that there are positive signs, and there's definitely things to be optimistic about with regard to really re-envisioning how people travel in their day-to-day lives. So that's something that obviously we've been involved with for a while and intend to be more involved with in the future.
Where are we, Camron, in this process of getting to a place where we can enjoy everything we like doing about travel, but do it in a way that it doesn't wreck the earth?
Well, I think we're making great progress. Every year that goes by, we're seeing more and more electric options and other clean options for people to buy. That we're seeing things in parts of the world that are, to me, unexpected. So, you look at India. In India, they're gaining something like 11,000 electric rickshaws every single month. And there's no government mandate for that. People are finding it to be the more affordable option to both be a driver and operator of those rickshaws, but also to get around. In China, obviously, they've done a lot of work on electric buses, which is awesome. But what a lot of people don't recognize is that same type of work is happening all over the world. And one of the strongest places is actually in Latin America. Santiago de Chile is one, the largest electric bus fleet in the world outside of China. And we're seeing similar things happen in Colombia, in Brazil, and really all over. So these things are coming. They're happening. And it's just a matter of time. I remember, a few years ago, there were questions about, boy, will electric vehicles really take hold? Will, hydrogen take hold? And now it's not even a question. I mean, we see OPEC projections for EV adoption in the hundreds of millions in the next 10 to 15 years. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, let's say, with regard to clean transit.
Paul Bunje, you said something that resonates with me about the COVID-19 being the lesson for everybody in exponential, right? We all kind of learn about it in school, but when you realize, when you're thinking about it in terms of a virus and how many people can be infected, but in fact, you work on the other side of exponential when it comes to climate. You work on exponential growth solutions to dealing with climate, and there are a lot of people who say, boy, if we took climate change as seriously as we have taken this, we could fix this very quickly, because the world has come together to deal with coronavirus in a way that it has taken us decades to get people to take climate change seriously, probably because you can't feel it the way you do with coronavirus. It doesn't come upon you and set upon you in a matter of days and shut down your life immediately, even though in the end, it will likely kill more people if we don't do the right thing than coronavirus ever will.
Yeah, that's totally right. And one of the challenges is that the exponentials often take a long time to really ramp up. So you don't see that pattern until the bend in the curve that really takes off. And the same thing, Fred made a great point. That happened early on here in the US with coronavirus, where people weren't recognizing it. And even a day waiting causes that the eventual growth in an exponential to be exponentially more, obviously. And we're seeing that, right? That the places that shut down their economies a day or a week earlier have seen significantly lower growth. Same thing with climate change. And what that means is every day we wait to do something is a day we are making it harder for us to turn around in the past. But you've already heard about technologies like solar and wind, which are cheaper now than generating electricity, certainly from coal. We've seen the last coal plant application in the United States withdrawn. We hope that it will completely go away. With oil, your point about the strangeness with the oil prices this week just drive home how volatile an economy that is and how disadvantageous it really is compared to other forms of generation. But there's other opportunities. I mean, Camron is speaking of one of the critical areas in demand. Let's get off of the things that have to use fossil fuels and turn them into things that are significantly more efficient. And one example, we at Conservation X Labs, we're all about trying to protect wildlife and end extinction. We're ending the sixth mass extinction, but we got to target those underlying drivers, the things that are really causing species to go extinct and habitats to be degraded. Climate change, top of the list. It's a force multiplier. It is the kind of thing that exacerbates everything else. And the last panel, some folks probably heard Jonathan Foley from Project Drawdown. You look through there, there's one thing at the top of the list that can be done, which is transform air conditioning. It's incredibly inefficient. It's incredibly polluting. The energy that's used, both for the energy that's used and the chemicals that go into it. So we launched with the Rocky Mountain Institute and the Indian government and a global coalition of other amazing partners, a global cooling prize to look for new solutions. And then right now, the 8 finalists are building out these technologies that will be ready to be sold within a year or two of now. And they're going to be 5 times better for the environment, 5 times less polluting when it comes to climate change than anything on the market now. That alone, if we get that kind of adoption just in India, which the Indian government has said it's going to do, means half a degree to a degree Celsius of avoided warming this century. One thing, one technological innovation that can go like that because exponential growth in technology is so gosh darn possible. And I think the more we read into that, the better off everybody's going to see the opportunities for us both to make a better economy and a better planet.
Fred, let me ask you about incentives, because we talked about this a little bit with Bill McDonough. We talked a little bit with Charlotte, right? Companies that do the right thing have various incentives to do it. Some of them are cost, some of them are savings, some of them are being on the right side of history and branding. What do you find? Because you have been dealing with companies, you have seen them turn around in a lot of ways. What's the motivation? What's the best motivation? Is it good enough to just want to be on the right side of history because you realize how serious an issue climate change is?
Well, that's good enough if that motivates someone. If they want to leave a legacy for their children and their grandchildren, we'll take that. But for most of the CEOs I know, they also feel a deep fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. But their shareholder value comes from a few different types of incentives. We find a huge factor is employee morale. We have the folks at every company we work with telling us that their employees want the company to be green, and that's whether it's Walmart or KKR or FedEx. Nowadays, millennials want the companies to do their part on climate change. We saw it at Amazon not too long ago as well, where the employees made an issue out of that. So that is one big important incentive, because if you can't attract the best employees, that's fatal ultimately to your enterprise. The second thing is investors provide incentives. More and more, we're seeing investor pressure from institutions like BlackRock, Elgin in London, Legal & General Investment Management. The demands on the companies they invest in are increasing, and I hope soon will require companies to be in alignment with our Paris goals. The other thing, Ali, I just want to underline is there's such a near-term opportunity, as Camron so pointed out so expertly, to clean the air with electrification, not only of cars, but of medium-sized trucks and eventually long-haul trucks and buses. There's studies that show that kids who are transported on an electric vehicle learn better than those coming and going on buses where the diesel fumes are just part of the operation. And so electrifying our fleets is critical. No one could have wished for blue skies clear skies because of the coronavirus, but we do have that silver lining that we're seeing, clear blue skies now. And a big cause of that is much, much less traffic from planes, from cars, from trucks, from buses. This gives us a taste and a vision of what together we can create as we electrify vehicles. And that's why this is one of the most important things governments can do as they stimulate the economy to make sure there are incentives for electrifying our transit.
And Camron, talk to me about, I don't know how well you can do this without a chart, but we all talk about electrifying things, but if you're generating electricity the wrong way, then you're not helping all that much. So what's the adoption of electrification of vehicles and other things alongside the adoption in the generation of clean electricity?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so these things need to happen in parallel, that you can't just electrify vehicles without also focusing on the power sector. And in fact, our view at NG, and it has been my work in the past with the US military and with the World Resources Institute, is that electric vehicles should be viewed as both mobility assets and as energy assets. And that the batteries within those vehicles can not just consume energy in a normal way, but they can actually provide energy back in a way that actually helps adopt more renewables. So you can actually expand your renewable portfolio using the electric vehicles as a tool. And so ultimately, that's what we'd like to see, is sort of a virtuous cycle where the renewables are powering the vehicles, which enable more renewables, which power more vehicles. And ultimately, that's how we see a vision towards deep decarbonization of the transport sector and subsequent to that, the energy sector.
Do you see them moving at similar paces, though? The energy sector cleaning up at the same rate that we're electrifying vehicles?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, everything is dependent on region and sort of government interests, but we see a lot of movement. I mean, again, NG alone as a company operates, so we have about 25 gigawatts of installed renewable energy. Not just one company, albeit a big company. So we see a lot of that happening in the private sector. It's a mission of our company, and of course there are other companies doing the same, and governments all over the world are committed to this. And on the electrification of transport side, obviously there's more government intervention needed, but we're very close. We're within years, a few years of being able to say that an electric car or electric truck is actually cheaper than its internal combustion alternative. So these things are going to happen roughly in parallel, and again, our task is to make sure that happens quickly and efficiently, and that we integrate things along the way.
Guys, what a great discussion, and you have given us reason to be optimistic about the way things are going, so we're deeply appreciative. Camron, Gorguinpour, thank you for joining us. Fred, thank you. Great to see you, and thank you for all your work. And, of course, my old friend, Paul Bunje, thanks to you as well, and a happy Earth Optimism Summit to everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.